Hi, Franklin friends. Miss Kennedy here to read another chapter of The Cricket in Times Square by George Selden. Last time we left off, Mario wanted to keep the cricket that we found out was making that noise as a pet, but Mama was not so sure about that. But Papa said he could keep it, so he left him in the newsstand. We're going to find out what happens next in the third chapter, which is called Chester. Tucker Mouse had been watching the Bellinis and listening to what they had said. Next to scrounging, eavesdropping on human beings was what he enjoyed most. That was one of the reasons he lived in the Times Square subway station. As soon as the family disappeared, he darted out across the floor and scooted up to the newsstand. At one side, the boards had separated, and there was a wide space he could jump through. He'd been in a few times before, just exploring. For a moment he stood under the three-legged stool, letting his eyes get used to the darkness. Then he jumped on it. Psst, psst, he whispered. Hey, hey, you up there! Are you awake? There was no answer. Psst, psst, hey, Tucker whispered again, louder this time. From the shelf above came a scuffling sound, like little feet feeling their way to the edge. Who is that going? Psst, said the voice. It's me, said Tucker. Down here on the stool. A black head with two shiny black eyes peered down at him. Who are you? A mouse, said Tucker. Who are you? I'm Chester Cricket, said the cricket. With a high musical voice, everything he said seemed to be spoken in an unheard melody. My name's Tucker, said Tucker Mouse. Can I come up? I guess so, said Chester Cricket. This isn't my house anyway. Tucker jumped up beside the cricket and looked him all over. A cricket, he said admiringly. So you're a cricket. I never saw one before. I've never seen mice before, said the cricket said. I knew quite a few back in Connecticut. Is that where you're from? Yes, said Chester. I guess I'll never see it again, he added wistfully. How did you get to New York? Asked Tucker Mouse. It's a long story, sighed Chester. Tell me, said Tucker, settling back on his haunches. He loved to hear stories. It was almost as much fun as eavesdropping, if the story was true. Well, it must have been 3 days, said Chester Cricket as he began. I was sitting on top of my stump, enjoying the weather and thinking about how nice it was that summer had started. I lived inside that old tree stump next to a willow tree, and I often go up to the roof to look around. And I've been practicing jumping that day, too. On the other side of the stump from the willow tree, there's a little brook that runs past, and I've been jumping back and forth across it to get my legs in condition for the summer. I do a lot of jumping, you know. Oh, me too, said Tucker Mouse, especially around rush hour. And I had just finished jumping when I smelled something, Chester went on. Liverwurst, which I love. You like liverwurst? Tucker broke in. Wait, just wait. On one leap, he sprung down all the way from the shelf to the floor and dashed across to the drain pipe. Chester shook his head as he watched him go. He thought Tucker was a kind of excitable person, even for a mouse. Inside the drain pipe, Tucker's nest was a jumble of papers and scraps of cloth, buttons, lost jewelry, small change, and everything else that he could pick up in the subway station. Tucker tossed things left and right in a wild search. Neatness was not one of the things he aimed for in life. At last he discovered what he was looking for, a big piece of liverwurst he had found earlier that evening. It was meant to be for breakfast tomorrow, but he decided that meeting his first cricket was a special occasion. Holding the liverwurst between his teeth, he whisked back to the newsstand. Look, he said proudly, dropping the meat in front of Chester Cricket. Liverwurst. You continue the story, and we'll enjoy a snack too. Ooh, that's very nice of you, said Chester. He was touched that a mouse he'd only known a few minutes would share his food with him. I had a little chocolate before, but besides that, nothing for 3 days. Oh, eat, said Tucker. He bit the liverwurst into two pieces, and gave Chester the bigger one. So you smelled the liverwurst. Then what happened? I hopped down from the stump and I went off toward the smell, said Chester. Oh, very logical, said Tucker Mouse, munching with his cheeks full. Exactly what I would have done. It was coming from a picnic basket, said Chester. A couple of uh, feet away from my stump in the meadow begins, there was a whole bunch of people having a picnic. They had hard boiled eggs and roasted chicken and roast beef and a whole lot of other things besides liverwurst sandwiches, which I could smell. Tucker moaned with pleasure at the thought of all that food. They were having such a good time laughing and singing songs, they didn't notice me when I jumped into the picnic basket, said Chester. I was sure they wouldn't mind if I just had a little taste. Oh, naturally not, said Tucker sympathetically. Why would they mind? Plenty for all. Who could blame you? Now, I have to admit, Chester went on, I had more than a taste. As a matter of fact, I ate so much that I couldn't keep my eyes open, what with being tired from all that jumping and everything, and I fell asleep right there in the picnic basket. The first thing I knew, somebody had put a big bag on top of me that had the last of the roast beef sandwiches in it. I couldn't move. Imagine, said Tucker, trapped under roast beef sandwiches. Oh, there are worse fates. At first I wasn't too afraid, said Chester. After all, I thought, they probably came from New Canaan or some other nearby town. They'll have to unpack the basket sooner or later. Little did I know. He shook his head and sighed. I could feel the basket being carried into a car and riding somewhere and then being lifted down. That must have been the railroad station. Then I went up again and there was a rattling and roaring sound, the way a train makes. And by that time I was pretty scared. I knew every minute was taking me farther and farther away from my stump. But there wasn't anything I could do. I was getting awfully cramped there under all those roast beef sandwiches. Didn't you try to, like, eat your way out? Said Tucker. Didn't have any room, said Chester. But every now and then the train would lurch, and I managed to free myself a little. We traveled on, and then the train stopped. I didn't have any idea where we were, but as soon as the basket was carried off, I could tell from the noise it had to be New York. You never were here before? Tucker asked. Goodness, no, said Chester, but I've heard about it. There was a swallow I used to know who told about flying over New York every spring and fall on her way to the north and back. But what would I be doing here? He shifted uneasily from one leg to the other. I'm a country cricket. Don't worry, said Tucker Mouse. I'll feed you liverwurst. You'll be all right. Go on with the story. It's almost over, said Chester. The people got off the train and walked a ways and got on another, even noisier than the first. Oh, that must have been the subway, said Tucker. I guess so, said Chester. You can imagine how scared I was. I didn't know where I was going. For all I knew, they could have been heading, I don't know, for Texas. Although I didn't guess many people from Texas came all the way to Connecticut for a picnic. Well, I guess it could happen, said Tucker, nodding his head. Anyway, I worked furiously to get loose, and finally I made it. When they got off the second train, I took a flying leap and landed in a pile of dirt over in the corner in the place where we are. Such an introduction to New York, said Tucker, to land in a pile of dirt in the Times Square subway station. And here I am, said Chester forlornly. I've been lying over there for 3 days now, not knowing what to do. At last, I got so nervous I began to chirp. Oh, that was that sound, interrupted Tucker Mouse. I heard it, but I didn't know what it was. Yes, that was me, said Chester. Usually I don't chirp until later in the summer. But oh my goodness, I had to do something. The cricket had been sitting next to the edge of the shelf. For some reason, perhaps it was a faint sound, like padded feet tiptoeing across the floor. He happened to look down. A shadowy form had been crouched in silence below in the darkness and made a spring and landed right next to Tucker and Chester. Watch out! shouted Chester, a cat! And he dove headfirst into his matchbox. That's the end of that chapter. There are a couple pictures too. Here's the first one where Tucker is coming over to say hi to Chester. He's going psst, psst. And they're first introduced to each other. And here's a little closer picture of Tucker sharing his liverwurst with Chester. All right. So we know Tucker and we know Mario and we know Chester now. The cricket has a name. His name is Chester. We have Mama and Papa Bellini. And now there's this other character, this cat that has jumped up onto the stool. We'll have to find out what happens. Until next time, bye for now.